The night was thick with an unnatural darkness, the kind that clung to the skin like wet silk, suffocating and heavy. Above the jagged skyline of Tokyo's cursed district, the moon hung swollen and crimson, its light bleeding across the rooftops in eerie, shifting patterns. This was no ordinary eclipse, it was a cursed one, a phenomenon whispered about in hushed tones by sorcerers and shamans alike. And tonight, beneath its baleful glow, Yuji Itadori would face something far worse than any curse he'd encountered before. Yuji sprinted across the rooftop, his breath steady despite the relentless pace. His sneakers barely made a sound as he vaulted over a ventilation shaft, his muscles coiled with precision. Behind him, the air rippled with malice as a grotesque figure emerged from the shadows, a cursed spirit, its body a writhing mass of elongated limbs and jagged teeth, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Without hesitation, Yuji pivoted, his fist already crackling with cursed energy. Divergent fist, he shouted, driving his knuckles into the spirit's torso. The impact sent shockwaves through the creature, its form distorting as the delayed second strike exploded inside it, tearing it apart from within. Black ichor splattered the concrete, evaporating into wisps of cursed smoke. Panting slightly, Yuji wiped his brow and glanced at the crimson moon. Something about it made his skin crawl. He wasn't alone in that feeling. From the edge of the rooftop, Megumi Fushiguro stepped forward, his expression grim. "This isn't just a random outbreak," he said, his voice low. "The eclipse is amplifying cursed energy. It's like the veil between our world and the cursed realm is thinning." His shadows writhed at his feet, restless and agitated. Yuji grinned, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his unease. "So, more punching bags for us, huh?" Megumi didn't return the smile. "Don't underestimate this. If the legends are true, the Moonlit Curse King awakens during eclipses like this. A disaster-level curse that hasn't been seen in centuries." Before Yuji could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A deafening roar split the night, and the rooftop cracked open as a monstrous hand, veined with glowing crimson lines, clawed its way up from the abyss. The air itself seemed to scream as the curse emerged, towering, its body clad in armor of blackened bone, its face obscured by a mask of twisted moonlight. The pressure of its cursed energy was suffocating, forcing Yuji to brace himself just to stand. Megumi's hands flew into a familiar formation. Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. The world around them warped as his domain unfolded, a labyrinth of shifting shadows. But the curse didn't falter. With a single swipe of its clawed hand, it shattered the domain like glass, sending Megumi staggering back, blood trickling from his nose. Yuji didn't waste a second. He lunged, his body a blur as he aimed a devastating kick at the curse's knee. The impact should have shattered bone, but the curse barely flinched. Its mask turned toward him, and Yuji's instinct screamed, "Dodge." He barely rolled aside as a crescent blade of cursed energy sliced through the space where he'd stood, carving a trench into the rooftop. This thing was on another level. From the shadows, Nobara Kujisaki emerged, her hammer already spinning. "Took you too long enough to call for backup," she quipped, driving a nail into her straw doll. Resonance. The curse's arm jerked violently as her technique reverberated through its cursed energy, but it didn't cry out, it laughed, a sound like grinding metal. The battle had only just begun. And somewhere, deep in the cursed eclipse, something even worse was stirring. The night was thick with the scent of burnt ozone and cursed energy, the air crackling like static before a storm. Yuji stood at the center of the battlefield, his breath ragged, knuckles bruised from the last exchange. The Moonlit Curse King loomed before him, its grotesque form shifting between shadow and substance, its laughter a series of wet, guttural clicks that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened sorcerers. The eclipse overhead painted the world in eerie crimson, the moon's edge swallowed by darkness, amplifying the curse's power tenfold. But something was wrong. Megumi's voice cut through the tension, sharp and urgent. "Yuji, behind you." Yuji spun just in time to see it, a second wave of cursed spirits, smaller but swarming like locusts, their bodies warped and pulsating with malignant energy. They weren't just random stragglers, they moved with purpose, flanking the battlefield, cutting off retreat. Nobara cursed under her breath, swinging her hammer in a wide arc to keep them at bay. "Since when do curses coordinate like this?" she snapped. Gojo's absence weighed heavy on them all. He had been called away mere hours before the eclipse, too convenient, Yuji thought. The timing reeked of a trap, but there was no time to dwell on it. The Moonlit Curse King's maw split wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth as it lunged. Yuji barely dodged, rolling to the side as the ground where he'd stood erupted in a geyser of cursed energy. He countered with a devastating punch, channeling Sukuna's lingering power just enough to send the beast reeling, but it wasn't enough. The Curse King recovered too quickly, its wounds knitting together like liquid shadow. Then came the whisper. Faint, barely audible beneath the chaos, but unmistakable, Sukuna's voice curled in the back of Yuji's mind like smoke. You're outmatched, brat. Let me out, or you all die here. Yuji gritted his teeth, shaking his head as if to dislodge the words. Not now. Not ever. Megumi's shadow surged forward, twin divine dogs materializing in a flash of darkness, their fangs aimed for the Curse King's legs. The beast howled as one latched on, but the other dog was swatted aside like a ragdoll, dissolving into inky mist. We need to disrupt its regeneration, Megumi shouted, sweat beading on his brow. Nobra, pin it down. Nobra didn't hesitate. She drove nails into her own arm, blood dripping as she invoked resonance. The Curse King shuddered as the technique rippled through its form, its body flickering like a corrupted signal. For a split second, Yuji saw an opening. He launched himself forward, fist pulled back, ready to deliver a crushing blow. Only for the ground beneath him to give way. A fissure split the earth, swallowing chunks of the battlefield whole. Yuji barely caught himself on the edge, fingers digging into crumbling soil as the abyss yawned beneath him. From the depths, a new presence emerged, a twisted, serpentine curse, its body woven from strands of cursed energy, its eyes glowing with eerie intelligence. It coiled around the Moonlit Curse King almost protectively, and realization struck Yuji like a hammer. They weren't just fighting one enemy. They were fighting a hierarchy. The serpent hissed, its voice a chorus of distorted whispers. Fools! You think this is just an eclipse? This is an awakening. Nobra's face paled. It's talking. Since when do curses? Megumi's hands were already moving, summoning new in a burst of feathers and lightning. The thunderbird screeched as it dive-bombed the serpent, talons raking across its scaled hide. The serpent retaliated with a whip-like strike, sending new careening into a nearby building. Debris rained down, forcing Yuji to scramble back as chunks of concrete shattered where he'd been standing. The Moonlit Curse King seized the moment, its form swelling as it absorbed the lingering energy of the eclipse. The secondary curses, now organized under the serpent's command, closed in from all sides. Yuji's chest tightened. They were being herded. Cornered. Then, from the rooftops above, a flash of pink. Maki landed like a meteor, her split staff carving through two lesser curses in a single swing. Her presence was a shockwave, her cursed energy minimal but her lethality undeniable. Stop gawking and move. She barked. Yuji didn't need telling twice. He vaulted over a fallen lamppost, using it as a springboard to launch himself back into the fray. Maki's arrival shifted the momentum, her precision strikes carved openings where brute force had failed. Nobra capitalized, driving nails into the serpent's flank, the resonance sending spasms through its body. Megumi's shadows lashed out, binding the Moonlit Curse King's limbs just long enough for Yuji to land a crushing uppercut, the impact reverberating up his arm. But the serpent was far from done. Its tail snapped like a whip, catching Maki across the ribs and sending her skidding across the pavement. Yuji's vision burned red. He didn't think, he moved. His next punch wasn't just his own strength, it was laced with something darker, something eager. Sukuna's influence pulsed through his veins, and for the first time, Yuji didn't fight it. The serpent's head exploded in a shower of black ichor. Silence. Then. The Moonlit Curse King screamed, not in pain, but in triumph. The eclipse reached totality. The world went black. In that darkness, Sukuna laughed. Now the real fun begins. And Yuji knew, with dawning horror, that they had just played right into the enemy's hands. The night was thick with the scent of ozone and cursed energy, the air crackling like static before a storm. Yuji Itadori wiped blood from his lip, his knuckles bruised and split from the last exchange. Above him, the cursed eclipse loomed, its crimson light painting the battlefield in eerie hues. The Moonlit Curse King towered at the center of it all, his grin jagged, his presence suffocating. Beside Yuji, Megumi's shadows writhed, and Nobra spun her hammer, both ready to strike again. But before they could move, a new figure dropped from the sky, landing between them and their enemy with a force that sent shockwaves through the earth. The stranger straightened, his long coat flaring as the dust settled. He was tall, his face half hidden behind a high collar, one eye gleaming gold like a predator's in the dark. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, and the cursed energy rolling off him was unlike anything they'd faced before, wild, untamed, a storm barely contained. Who the hell are you? Yuji demanded, fists tightening. The man smirked. Name's Ryota Kiba. And you're in my way. Before anyone could react, Ryota lunged, not at the Moonlit Curse King, but at Yuji. His fist blurred, a streak of condensed cursed energy trailing behind it. Yuji barely raised his arms in time, the impact sending him skidding back, his boots carving trenches in the earth. Pain flared up his forearms, but he grinned. "All right, new guy. Let's dance." Ryota didn't waste words. He twisted midair, his legs snapping out in a vicious roundhouse. Yuji ducked, countering with a brutal uppercut, but Ryota flipped over it, landing behind him and driving an elbow toward his spine. Megumi's divine dogs intercepted, forcing Ryota to pivot, but the stranger moved like liquid, dodging, weaving, his movements unpredictable. Nobra cursed, hammer swinging. "We don't have time for this." Ryota caught her wrist mid-swing, yanking her off balance before kneeing her in the gut. She gasped, but twisted, driving a nail into his side. He hissed, blood blooming on his coat, but his grin never wavered. "Cute trick." The Moonlit Curse King laughed, clapping slowly. "How entertaining. Mortals turning on each other like starving dogs." Yuji's jaw clenched. This wasn't just some random fighter, Ryota was toying with them, testing them. And worse, he was enjoying it. Megumi's hands flashed through signs. "New." The massive Shikigami screeched as it dove, talons outstretched. Ryota didn't flinch. Instead, he raised a hand, and Nu stopped, suspended midair as if caught in an invisible grip. The air around Ryota shimmered, his cursed energy warping space itself. Yuji's blood ran cold. Domain? No, something else. Ryota flicked his wrist, and Nu was hurled aside like a ragdoll, crashing into a crumbling building. Megumi staggered, sweat beading on his brow. "He's manipulating cursed energy at a molecular level," he gritted out. "Like Gojo-sensei, but different." Ryota chuckled. "Observant. But not enough." He vanished, reappearing behind Nobra in an instant. She barely turned before his palm struck her chest, a pulse of cursed energy sending her flying. Yuji roared, charging, but Ryota sidestepped, grabbing his arm and flipping him over his shoulder. The ground rushed up to meet Yuji, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. The Moonlit Curse King sighed. "As fun as this is, I'd rather not be upstaged." He raised a hand, and the sky darkened further, tendrils of cursed energy spiraling toward them. Ryota finally turned to face him, his golden eye narrowing. "You talk too much." Then he moved. His speed was unreal, 1 second he was there, the next he'd crossed the distance, his fist slamming into the Curse King's jaw. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield, the ground fracturing beneath them. The Curse King staggered, his grin faltering for the first time. Yuji pushed himself up, chest heaving. What the hell was this guy's deal? 1 second he was attacking them, the next he was going after the bigger threat. Nobra spat blood, glaring. "He's using us as bait. Testing the Curse King's strength." Megumi's shadows coiled around him. "Or he's got his own agenda." Ryota and the Curse King clashed again, their blows sending shockwaves that rattled the ruins around them. Ryota's fighting style was brutal, efficient, every strike aimed to kill. But the Curse King was no pushover, his cursed energy lashing out like living tendrils, forcing Ryota to weave and dodge. Then, mid-battle, Ryota's gaze flicked to Yuji. "You're strong," he admitted, as if it were a reluctant afterthought. "But you fight like you're holding back." Yuji bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ryota ducked under a swipe of the Curse King's claws, countering with a knee to his ribs. "You rely too much on that power inside you. It's not yours." The words struck deeper than any physical blow. Yuji's fists trembled. The Curse King seized the opening, his cursed energy swelling. Enough distractions. A massive wave of dark energy surged toward them. Yuji braced himself, but Ryota was suddenly there, his cursed energy flaring. He raised both hands, and the wave split, parting around him like water around a stone. Nobra's eyes widened. "He's redirecting it?" Ryota's muscles strained, veins bulging as he wrestled with the energy. Then, with a roar, he shoved it back, straight at the Curse King. The explosion lit up the battlefield, the force sending debris flying. When the smoke cleared, the Curse King was on one knee, his form flickering. Ryota panted, his coat torn, but his smirk was back. "Now that's how you fight." Yuji's mind raced. This guy was dangerous, unpredictable. But right now, he was the only reason they weren't dead. Megumi stepped forward. "Why help us?" Ryota wiped blood from his mouth. "I didn't. I just hate arrogant curses." He turned, his golden eye locking onto Yuji. "But you're interesting. I'll be watching." Then, As quickly as he'd appeared, Ryota vanished, leaving them with more questions than answers, and a battle far from over. The Moonlit Curse King rose, his laughter echoing. What a delightful twist. Now, where were we? Yuji cracked his knuckles, exhaling. Guess we're doing this the hard way. The fight was far from over. And with Ryota in the mix, nothing would ever be the same. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and blood as Yuji leapt backward, barely avoiding the crescent arc of the Moonlit Curse King's scythe. The battlefield, bathed in the eerie crimson glow of the cursed eclipse, felt like a nightmare given form. Every step Yuji took was heavy, as if the very earth resisted him, the curse-infested ground writhing beneath his feet. His breath came in ragged gasps, his muscles burning from exertion, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not when the stakes were this high. The Curse King's laughter echoed through the ruined cityscape, a sound like shattering glass. You fight well for a mere human, it taunted, its voice layered with a dozen whispers. But you cannot outrun the inevitable. Its form flickered, shifting between corporeal and spectral, making it nearly impossible to land a decisive blow. Yuji clenched his fists, his cursed energy flaring in response, but even that felt sluggish, as if the eclipse itself was draining his strength. Then, from the shadows, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Yuji! Fall back! It was Megumi, his face streaked with sweat and blood, his Shikigami barely holding their own against the curse's minions. Yuji hesitated, retreat wasn't in his nature, but the desperation in Megumi's eyes made him reconsider. Something was wrong. Before he could react, a searing pain tore through his side. Yuji staggered, his vision swimming as he looked down to see a blade protruding from his ribs, not the Curse King's, but one he recognized instantly. The hilt was wrapped in black cloth, the same as Nobra's. His blood ran cold as he turned, disbelief choking him. Nobra stood behind him, her expression unreadable, her eyes hollow. I'm sorry, she whispered, but her voice wasn't her own. It was laced with the same cursed energy that radiated from the Moonlit King. Yuji's mind reeled. Possession? A trick? But the wound was real, and so was the betrayal in her stance. The Curse King's laughter deepened. Did you truly believe your allies were beyond my reach? The eclipse bends all to my will. Megumi's voice was sharp with urgency. It's not her. The curse is manipulating her, we have to break its hold. But Yuji could barely process the words. Nobra, his friend, his comrade, had just stabbed him. The pain in his chest was nothing compared to the crushing weight of that realization. The Curse King seized the moment, its form solidifying as it lunged, its scythe aimed for Yuji's throat. Instinct saved him, he twisted, the blade grazing his shoulder instead, but the force sent him sprawling. His vision blurred, his body screaming in protest. He couldn't fight like this. Not against both the curse and Nobra. Then, a flash of movement, Megumi was beside him, his hands weaving a complex sign. Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. The world twisted as shadows erupted, swallowing the battlefield whole. The Curse King hissed, its form flickering under the oppressive darkness, but it didn't falter. A valiant effort, it sneered, but you lack the power to contain me. Yuji forced himself to his knees, blood dripping from his wounds. He had to think. The Curse King was stronger than they'd anticipated, and now it had turned Nobra against them. But there had to be a weakness. The eclipse, it was fueling the curse's power. If they could disrupt it, even for a moment. A plan formed in his mind, reckless but necessary. Megumi, he shouted over the din. Buy me 10 seconds. Megumi didn't question him. He redoubled his assault, his Shikigami surging forward in a desperate bid to distract the Curse King. Yuji closed his eyes, focusing past the pain, past the doubt. He channeled every ounce of cursed energy he had left, his fists glowing with raw power. This would hurt. It might even kill him. But if it gave them a chance. He launched himself forward, not at the Curse King, but at Nobra. She raised her weapon again, but this time, Yuji didn't dodge. He let the blade sink into his shoulder, using the momentum to close the distance. Then, with a surge of energy, he wrapped his arms around her in a crushing embrace. Forgive me, he whispered, before unleashing a point-blank black flash directly into her cursed energy signature. The explosion of light and force sent them both flying. Nobra's scream was deafening, but beneath it, Yuji heard something else, the Curse King's enraged roar. The eclipse flickered, its crimson glow dimming as the curse's control wavered. It had worked. But the cost was steep. Yuji lay broken on the ground, his body refusing to obey him. Nobra was motionless beside him, her breathing shallow. The Curse King, though weakened, was far from defeated. Its form twisted in fury, its power coalescing into a final, devastating attack. Megumi stood between them and death, his stance unyielding, but Yuji knew it wouldn't be enough. Not unless they did something drastic. As the Curse King's scythe descended, Yuji made his choice. He reached for the one technique he'd sworn never to use, the forbidden binding vow that would trade his life for a single, unstoppable strike. The battlefield fell silent as he whispered the incantation. Then, everything burned. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and iron, the remnants of a battle that had left the city in ruins. Yuji wiped blood from his split lip, his breath ragged as he stared up at the monstrous figure looming over him, the moonlit Curse King, its form wreathed in shadows, its crimson eyes burning with an otherworldly hunger. Around him, the remnants of his allies lay battered, their curses flickering weakly. They had gambled everything on this fight, and now, with the cursed eclipse reaching its zenith, the stakes had never been higher. Nobra groaned, pulling herself up from the rubble, her hammer clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "We can't keep trading blows like this," she spat. "That thing's regenerating faster than we can hurt it." Megumi, panting beside her, nodded grimly. His shadows coiled protectively around them, but even they seemed to recoil from the Curse King's presence. The realization settled over them like a death sentence: they were outmatched. Yuji clenched his fists, feeling the sting of his own limitations. He had trained relentlessly, pushed his body to its limits, but against an enemy that thrived in the eclipse's cursed energy, brute strength wasn't enough. "There has to be a way," he muttered. Then, a memory flashed, Gojo's words from long ago. "Curses are bound by rules, even the strongest ones. Find the pattern, exploit the weakness." A plan formed in his mind, reckless but necessary. "We need to disrupt its connection to the eclipse," he said, turning to the others. "If we can cut off its power source, even for a second, we might stand a chance." Megumi's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about separating it from the moon's cursed energy. That's suicide. We'd have to get close enough to disrupt its core." Nobra smirked, despite the blood trickling down her temple. "So? Since when have we ever played it safe?" With no time to waste, they moved. Megumi summoned his divine dogs, their spectral forms darting ahead as distractions while Nobra lined up her nails, imbuing them with cursed energy. Yuji charged forward, his fists blazing with raw power. The Curse King roared, swiping at him with claws that rent the air itself, but Yuji twisted midair, using the momentum to slam a devastating kick into its ribcage. Bone cracked, but the wound sealed instantly, the eclipse's glow pulsing stronger. Nobra's nails struck true, embedding themselves in the curse's flesh. With a cry, she triggered her technique, the resonance sent shockwaves through its body, but it wasn't enough. The Curse King retaliated, a whip-like tendril lashing out and sending her crashing into a crumbling building. Megumi seized the opening, his hands weaving signs. Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. The world warped as shadows surged, trapping the curse within a labyrinth of teeth and claws. For a moment, it seemed to work, the curse staggered, disoriented. But then, with a sickening laugh, it flexed its power, and the domain shattered like glass. Yuji didn't hesitate. He knew what had to be done. With a burst of speed, he closed the distance, his body screaming in protest as he channeled every ounce of cursed energy into his fists. Black flash. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield, the sheer force disrupting the eclipse's energy for a split second, just long enough. The Curse King held, its form flickering. It wasn't much, but it was proof. They could hurt it. As the dust settled, the realization hit them all: this was only the beginning. The eclipse was far from over, and the Curse King's fury would only grow. But for the first time, they had seen a crack in its invincibility. And that was all they needed. The air crackled with cursed energy as Yuji Itadori lunged forward, his fists wrapped in spiraling black and red aura. The moonlit Curse King loomed before him, its grotesque form bathed in the eerie glow of the eclipse, its jagged grin stretching unnaturally wide. "You're persistent, little sorcerer," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice as it swiped a clawed hand, sending a crescent of cursed energy slicing through the battlefield. Yuji twisted midair, narrowly avoiding the attack, but the force of it sent shockwaves through the ground, kicking up dust and debris. Across the ruined plaza, Megumi Fushiguro darted between shadows, his hands weaving intricate signs. "Divine Dog, Totality," he shouted, summoning his Shikigami in its merged form, a massive, twin-headed wolf that lunged at the Curse King with fangs bared. The beast clamped down on the curse's arm, but the king merely laughed, its flesh warping and regenerating instantly. With a flick of its wrist, it hurled the Shikigami aside like a ragdoll, sending Megumi skidding back. Yuji didn't waste a second. He channeled every ounce of cursed energy into his legs and shot forward like a bullet, his right fist pulled back, knuckles glowing with the raw force of his technique. Black flash. The impact connected, a thunderous boom as space itself distorted, sending the Curse King hurtling through the remnants of a shattered building. But before Yuji could celebrate, the dust cleared, revealing the curse still standing, its body reforming at an alarming rate. Pathetic, it sneered, flexing its elongated fingers. You think brute force alone can defeat me? Its form shifted, limbs elongating further, its cursed energy surging like a tidal wave. Yuji gritted his teeth, feeling the exhaustion creeping in, but he couldn't afford to slow down now. Megumi wiped blood from his lip, his mind racing. We need a new strategy. Yuji. Keep it distracted, he yelled, before slamming his palms together again. Domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. The world twisted as darkness swallowed the battlefield, an endless labyrinth of shifting shadows. The Curse King snarled, its movement suddenly sluggish as Megumi's domain sapped its strength. Seizing the opening, Yuji dashed in, feinting left before twisting into a spinning kick that sent the curse reeling. But the king was far from finished. Its body contorted unnaturally, its limbs stretching like liquid to wrap around Yuji's ankle. Got you, it purred before flinging him into the ground with bone-shattering force. Yuji coughed blood, his vision swimming. Damn it. He forced himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. Across the battlefield, Megumi was struggling to maintain his domain, sweat pouring down his face. The Curse King was adapting, fast. Then, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Need a hand? Nobara Kujisaki stood atop a broken pillar, her straw doll clutched in one hand, nails in the other. Without waiting for a response, she hurled a nail with pinpoint accuracy, embedding it in the curse's shoulder. Resonance. The curse's body jerked as if struck by an invisible force, cracked spider webbing across its form. The king roared in fury, its attention snapping to Nobara. Another pest? It launched a barrage of cursed projectiles, but Nobara dodged with practiced ease, flipping backward and landing beside Yuji. Took you long enough, Yuji muttered, grinning despite the pain. Shut up and focus, Nobara shot back, but her smirk betrayed her. The three stood together, battered but unbroken. The Curse King's laughter echoed through the ruins. How adorable. But this ends now. Its cursed energy surged, the eclipse above darkening further as it prepared its ultimate technique. Yuji clenched his fists, feeling something awaken within him, a spark of power he hadn't tapped into before. His vision sharpened, the world slowing around him. This is it. He exchanged a glance with Megumi and Nobara, and without a word, they moved in perfect sync. Megumi unleashed a torrent of shikigami, rabbits, snakes, even his new, all swarming the curse to keep it off balance. Nobara hammered nails into her doll, each strike amplifying the resonance tearing through the king's body. And Yuji? He charged, his body alight with a new, terrifying energy. The Curse King's eyes widened for the first time. Impossible. Yuji's fist connected. Not just a black flash, this was something more. A burst of crimson and black energy erupted on impact, engulfing the battlefield in a blinding explosion. The ground split, the sky trembled, and for a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, silence. The dust settled. The eclipse faded. The Curse King's body lay motionless, its form crumbling into dissolving cursed energy. Yuji collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Nobara slumped beside him, and Megumi barely kept himself upright. They'd done it. But as the last remnants of the curse dissipated, a whisper slithered through the air. This isn't over. Yuji's blood ran cold. The battle was won. But the war? It had only just begun. The air was thick with the stench of curses, the battlefield bathed in the eerie glow of the eclipsed moon. Yuji's muscles screamed as he dodged another swipe of the Curse King's claws, the ground beneath him cracking under the force of the missed strike. His breath came in ragged gasps, sweat mingling with blood as it dripped from his brow. The curse energy radiating from the king was suffocating, a tangible weight pressing down on him, but he couldn't afford to falter, not now. Behind him, his allies were barely holding their own, their bodies battered, their spirits frayed. This was it, the moment everything would be decided. The Curse King lunged again, his form a blur of darkness and malice, but Yuji twisted at the last second, channeling every ounce of cursed energy into his fist. The impact sent shockwaves through the air, the king staggering back for the first time in the battle. A grin split Yuji's face, this was his chance. Now, he roared, and his comrades surged forward, their attacks converging in a storm of light and fury. Nobara's nails tore through the air, embedding themselves in the king's flesh, while Megumi's shadows lashed out like living tendrils, binding the monstrous figure in place. But the king only laughed, a sound that chilled the blood. "You think this is enough?" He sneered, his body convulsing as he began to break free. The eclipse above darkened further, the cursed energy in the air thickening like tar. Yuji's heart pounded, they were running out of time. He could feel the toll the fight had taken on his body, every movement agony, but he couldn't stop. Not when so much was at stake. With a final, desperate cry, Yuji reached deep within himself, past the pain, past the exhaustion, to the raw power that had always been there. His fists ignited with crimson energy, the sheer force of it sending cracks spider webbing through the ground beneath him. The Cursed King's eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, before Yuji was upon him. The first punch shattered the king's guard, the second sent him crashing into the earth, and the third was everything. A blinding explosion of light erupted as Yuji's fist connected, the shockwave ripping through the battlefield, sending debris flying in all directions. When the dust settled, the king was on his knees, his form flickering, his power waning. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. "You," he growled, raising a trembling hand. "You cannot win." Yuji staggered, his vision swimming, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Maybe not," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "But I'll keep fighting until there's nothing left." The king's laughter was weaker now, but no less venomous. "Foolish boy." Then, with a final, shuddering breath, the eclipse began to break. The moon's light returned, pale and pure, washing over the battlefield. The Cursed King's form wavered, his body dissolving into shadows as the cursed energy sustaining him faded. The battle was over, for now. Yuji collapsed to his knees, his body spent, but his heart still burning with resolve. They'd won this fight, but the war was far from over. And as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, he knew the hardest battles were yet to come. The air hung thick with the scent of scorched earth and lingering curses, the battlefield a testament to the brutal clash that had just unfolded. Yuji's chest heaved as he staggered back, his knuckles raw and bleeding, the remnants of the Moonlit Cursed King's power still crackling in the air like static. Around him, his allies were no better off. Nobara leaned heavily against a shattered tree, her hammer clutched in a trembling grip, while Megumi's shadows flickered weakly at his feet, his usual composure fractured by exhaustion. They had won. At least, that's what they'd thought. But the eclipse wasn't over. The crimson moon, swollen and unnatural, pulsed overhead, its light seeping into the cracks of the earth like blood. A low, guttural laugh echoed from the shadows, and Yuji's stomach dropped. From the depths of the cursed energy they'd just dispersed, something new began to coalesce, a figure, taller than any curse they'd faced, its body woven from the remnants of the fallen king's power. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its voice was a chorus of whispers, each one a fragment of the curses they'd exorcised. "You broke the seal," it hissed, "but you didn't think about what was sealed beneath." Nobara spat blood onto the ground, forcing herself upright. "Another one? Seriously?" Her voice was hoarse, but her grip on her hammer tightened. Megumi's hands twitched, his fingers forming the beginnings of a sign, but his shadow sputtered, too drained. Yuji clenched his fists, ignoring the pain. They didn't have a choice. The new curse lunged, its form shifting like smoke, and Yuji barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the ground where he'd stood erupted in a spray of cursed energy. He countered with a punch, but his fist passed through the curse's body as if it were mist. It reformed behind him, claws raking across his back, and he hissed as blood welled up. "It's intangible," he shouted. Megumi's eyes narrowed. Not entirely. He pointed to the ground, where the curse's footsteps left faint imprints in the dirt. "It solidifies when it attacks. That's our opening." Nobara grinned, despite the blood trickling from her temple. "Then we make it attack." She hurled a nail, and the curse instinctively swatted it aside, its arm solidifying for just a second. Yuji was already moving, his fist slamming into the curse's now corporeal wrist with a sickening crack. The creature howled, its form rippling in pain, but it wasn't enough. The fight became a desperate dance, Nobara baiting, Megumi directing, Yuji striking, but the curse was learning. It stopped swatting at projectiles, instead dissolving entirely before reforming elsewhere, its attacks growing more erratic. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, it split into three identical figures, each one lunging from a different direction. Yuji barely had time to react before one of the copies slammed into him, sending him skidding across the battlefield. He tasted copper, his vision swimming, but he forced himself up. They were running out of time. The eclipse was reaching its peak, and the curse was feeding on it, growing stronger with every passing second. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a voice cut through the chaos. Need a hand? Gojo Satoru stepped forward, his blindfold slightly askew, a smirk playing on his lips. But something was off, his usual effortless confidence was strained, his movements just a fraction slower. Even he wasn't at full strength. The curse recoiled, hissing, but Gojo didn't give it time to regroup. With a flick of his fingers, space itself twisted, crushing one of the copies into nothingness. The other two scattered, but Nobara was ready, her nails embedding into the second copy's shadow just as it solidified. Yuji didn't hesitate, he drove his fist straight through its chest, the curse dissolving into black smoke. The last one turned to flee, but Megumi's weakened shadows lashed out, tangling around its legs. Gojo's hand closed into a fist, and the curse imploded with a final, ear-splitting shriek. Silence. Then, the ground trembled. The eclipse wasn't just amplifying curses, it was breaking something. A fissure split the earth at their feet, and from the darkness below, 100 glowing eyes blinked open. Yuji swallowed hard. The real fight was just beginning. Word count, 2000. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and blood as Yuji staggered backward, his breath ragged. The cursed eclipse loomed overhead, a swirling void that pulsed with malevolent energy, casting the battlefield in an eerie crimson glow. Before him, the moonlit Curse King stood triumphant, his form wreathed in shadows, his laughter a grating symphony of malice. You fought well, little sorcerer, the king taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. But this is where your story ends. Around Yuji, his allies were battered, Nobara's grip on her hammer was unsteady, her fingers trembling from exhaustion, while Megumi's shadows flickered weakly, his cursed energy nearly spent. Even Gojo, usually unshakable, bore fresh wounds, his infinity strained to its limits. The situation was dire. Nobara spat blood onto the ground, her eyes blazing with defiance. We're not done yet, she snarled, though her voice wavered. Megumi forced himself upright, his mind racing. We can't keep trading blows, he's feeding off the eclipse. We need to cut off his power source. Gojo wiped sweat from his brow, his usual smirk absent. Easier said than done. That eclipse isn't just a spectacle, it's a curse technique on a planetary scale. Yuji clenched his fists, feeling the weight of their desperation. Then we hit him with everything we've got, all at once. No holding back. The plan was reckless, born of necessity. They would exploit the one vulnerability they'd glimpsed. The moonlit Curse King's connection to the eclipse was strongest at its zenith, but that also made him momentarily stationary, channeling energy. If they could disrupt that link, even for a second, they might turn the tide. Nobara would use her resonance technique to target the king's cursed energy directly, while Megumi would summon his strongest Shikigami to bind him. Gojo would amplify their efforts with a hollow purple, and Yuji would deliver the final blow, channeling every ounce of his strength into a single, decisive strike. It was a gamble. If they mistimed it, the backlash could kill them all. The king's laughter grew louder as the eclipse reached its peak, his form swelling with power. Pathetic, he sneered. You still think you can win? Nobara didn't answer. Instead, she drove a nail into her own palm, blood dripping onto the cursed talisman clutched in her other hand. Resonance, blood price. She screamed, and the air shuddered as her technique lashed out, striking the king's core. He staggered, his smug expression faltering for the first time. Megumi didn't waste the opening, his hands flashed through seals, and from the shadows, the massive form of Maharega emerged, its chains whipping forward to ensnare the king. Gojo's eyes narrowed as he raised his hands, the space around him distorting. Hollow purple, he murmured, and the world seemed to fracture as a vortex of destructive energy tore through the battlefield. The king roared, his body straining against the combined assault, but he was pinned, for now. Yuji didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, his muscles burning, his vision narrowing to the king's snarling face. Every step felt like wading through tar, the cursed energy in the air thick enough to choke on. But he pushed harder, drawing on reserves he didn't know he had. The king's eyes locked onto him, wide with realization and fear. Yuji didn't let him finish. With a wordless cry, he drove his fist into the king's chest, pouring every ounce of cursed energy into the impact. The world exploded in light and sound, the force of the blow sending shockwaves rippling outward. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the king screamed, his form fracturing, shadows peeling away like burning paper. The eclipse above flickered, the crimson glow dimming. But victory came at a cost. Yuji collapsed to his knees, his arm numb, his vision swimming. Nobara was on the ground, unconscious but breathing. Megumi had fallen to one knee, Maharega dissipating into smoke. Gojo's infinity flickered weakly, his usual effortless grace replaced by exhaustion. The king wasn't dead, his shattered form writhed, already beginning to reform. Not over, he hissed. Yuji forced himself to stand. Yeah, he panted, wiping blood from his mouth. It is. With the last of his strength, he raised his fist again. The others stirred, rallying despite their wounds. The fight wasn't finished, but neither were they. The crimson moon hung low in the sky, its eerie glow casting long shadows across the battlefield as Yuji stood panting, his fists clenched and cursed energy crackling around him. The Curse King loomed before him, its monstrous form twisting like smoke under the eclipse, its laughter a guttural rumble that shook the earth. You fought well, little sorcerer, it taunted, but this is where your story ends. Yuji wiped blood from his lip, his mind racing. The others were scattered, Nobara and Megumi battered but still standing, their resolve unbroken despite the wounds they bore. This was it. The final stand. With a roar, Yuji launched himself forward, his fist igniting with black and red energy. The Curse King swiped a clawed hand, but Yuji twisted midair, narrowly avoiding the strike before driving his knuckles into the beast's ribs. The impact sent shockwaves through the air, but the Curse King barely flinched, countering with a backhand that sent Yuji skidding across the ground. Gritting his teeth, he rolled to his feet just as Megumi's shadows erupted from the earth, chains of darkness lashing around the Curse King's limbs. Now, Megumi shouted. Nobara sprang from the side, hammer raised, nails glowing with cursed energy. She slammed them into the beast's flank, the resonance technique sending ripples of pain through its form. The Curse King held, its body convulsing as it tore free from the shadows. Its eyes burned with fury, and with a snap of its fingers, the ground beneath them split open, jagged spikes of cursed energy erupting like a forest of blades. Yuji barely dodged, his reflexes pushed to the limit, but Nobara wasn't as fast. One spike grazed her side, drawing a sharp cry. Nobara! Megumi lunged, pulling her back as more spikes shot upward. The Curse King advanced, its grin widening. You insects still don't understand. This eclipse is my domain. Here, I am unstoppable. Yuji's fists trembled. He could feel his energy waning, but he couldn't afford to falter. Then, a memory flashed, Gojo's words, spoken long ago, strength isn't just about power. It's about the will to keep fighting when everything says you should fall. A surge of determination burned through him. He wouldn't let it end like this. With a deep breath, Yuji focused, drawing every last ounce of cursed energy into his core. His body glowed, the air around him distorting as he channeled Sukuna's residual power, not for destruction, but for control. The Curse King paused, sensing the shift. What's this? Yuji's voice was steady. You're right. This is your domain. But I don't need to break it. He raised his hands, and the ground beneath him pulsed. I just need to make it mine. The world seemed to hold its breath as Yuji unleashed his technique, Divergent Fist, amplified to its absolute limit. The shockwave ripped through the battlefield, not as a blunt force, but as a wave of pure negation. The Curse King's spikes shattered, its domain flickering like a dying flame. For the first time, fear flickered in its eyes. Impossible. Seizing the opening, Megumi and Nobara struck. Megumi's divine dogs lunged, their fangs sinking into the Curse King's legs while Nobara's nails found their mark, embedding deep into its chest. The resonance exploded, tearing chunks of cursed flesh away. The beast staggered, its form wavering. Yuji didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, his fist blazing like a meteor. This ends now. The punch connected with a thunderous crack, the force so immense it sent shockwaves rippling through the eclipse itself. The Curse King's body disintegrated, its final scream echoing into the void as the crimson moon shattered, the eclipse fading into dawn. Silence fell. The battlefield was a ruin, but the sky was clear. Yuji collapsed to his knees, exhaustion crashing over him. Nobara and Megumi staggered to his side, their faces streaked with dirt and blood but alive. We did it, Nobara breathed, her voice hoarse. Megumi nodded, though his eyes were heavy with the weight of what they'd lost along the way. As the sun rose, its light warm and forgiving, Yuji looked at his hands. They were scarred, bruised, but still capable of holding on to the future. The world had changed. The curses weren't gone, they never would be, but today, they had won. And that was enough. The road ahead was uncertain, but for now, in the quiet of the morning, they allowed themselves to rest. The fight was over. The dawn was theirs. Word count, 2000.